Hello, welcome to Skills-Based Health on Demand. Today we are going to be helping you learn more about making the shift to skills-based health education. So in our first video, we talked about why skills-based health education, and in this video, we're going to talk to you about how to make that shift. My name's Brad Brummel. I'm the Health and PE Coordinator in Springfield Public Schools, and I am joined by Kim Goforth. Kim?
Hi, everybody. I am Kim Goforth, and I am the Health and PE Coordinator in the Columbia Public Schools.
We're excited that you joined us, and we're going to jump right in.
All right. We're going to take a look at our agenda today, and we're going to start with our objectives as we roll through our session. We're going to start focusing on the goals of health education, and then the next two phases, the planning for skills-based health education and then the stages of skill development, is where we'll spend the meat of our time. That's really the heart of our session to help you as educators make this shift from more of a content-based health ed to skills-based health ed. And then we're going to wrap up with some helpful resources to continue your journey that we have found helpful. We're going to help you get those in your hands and move forward.
So at the end of the video today, we hope that you will be able to utilize the 1/3 versus 2/3 model to analyze a current health lesson of your own. We hope that you can explain the 3 stages of the progression model that Kim discussed. We hope that you can utilize the 3 stages of that progression to analyze a current health lesson. And then we want you to be able to access and explore the RMC Health Skill Guides. The training guide is available for you to access and download. If you look at the description on the YouTube video, you'll find a link there. You can click it, make sure you download it to your computer, and then you'll be able to type in it and edit that PDF. But this will help you kind of reflect and just take a little bit more out of today's learning.
Very good. We are going to open this session with a little review and a reminder of why on health education in general. And we're going to start with the goals of health education. And you will see these bleed through this entire series that Brad and I are hosting on health education. And as we find these to be very foundational and kind of the paramount of why we need this shift in our learning to more skills-based. And so we take 2 of our organizations that we work with frequently and look at what they say the goals of health education are. And so this slide indicates the Shape America goals of health education, and that opening paragraph talks about this skills-based approach and that it is the best practice for delivering this quality of education that we need to get to our students. And you also see in the second and third paragraphs that it focuses on that health literacy piece. And we talk about that at the national standard level for both health and PE. And so what does that mean for health literacy in being health literate for not only ourselves, but others? And I think that's important for students to not just focus on their own health, but how they can help facilitate healthy behaviors for people around them. So that health literacy plays in from SHAPE as far as goals are concerned. And then the RMC Health group has their goals of health education, very much the same, but they've added a few more on just the core behavior of what we are looking for. We want all students to walk away from their K-12 health experience maintaining their own healthy behaviors, addressing the unhealthy ones, and delaying any onset of some risky behaviors. And then there's that health literacy piece again that SHAPE also shared. So those are our, keep those in the forefront of our mind as we work through any of our content that we have in these series.
Thank you, Kim. So again, if you have not already watched the first video in our on-demand series, Why Skills-Based Health Education, we would highly encourage you to start there, because in that video, we really dive deep into the goals. We kind of go into this skills versus content conversation. And we talk, we talk a lot about how the content alone cannot help us reach the goals of health education that Kim just discussed. And really what it comes down to is teaching the students these health skills are going to help maintain these healthy behaviors and delay risky behaviors, which is why we're on the business to start with. So again, if you have not seen that first video. We highly encourage you to check it out. But again, the skills versus content all goes back to the goals that we just discussed. So making this shift, it all has to start with our planning. When we talk about going from content-based health education to skills-based, it has to start with our planning. And so we're going to dive deep into that. And we're going to start off by talking about a backwards design.
Yes. Brad and I share this curricular development nerdiness. I think I can say that for both of us, Brad. And so as we look at the bigger picture of backwards design, you see there on the far right that is crossing the finish line for our students, the goals of health education. And like Brad just said, that's why we're here. That's why we're in the business. And so we have our students there on the left. And so how can we backwards design to get them across this finish line? And so for our big high level look, we start with our standards. We start with the national standards. We start with a lot of these other resources that we'll mention later. So we look at those standards. What do we want our kids to know and master to cross that finish line into the rest of their lives? The step before that, we start with our assessments. And Brad and I are going to focus a little bit on this in another training series that you'll see, but we're going to really focus on the purple and yellow sections, but the assessment has to come first. They have to align to our standards, and it allows them to demonstrate that mastery. And so as we talk about the purple and yellow columns here, don't get lost in the fact that this is the teacher stuff and we want to plan these cool activities and lessons, but stay focused on the assessment. That's going to have to come and change as you make those shifts as well. So the assessments get in line. The practice opportunities are going to be paramount as we shift to the skills-based health education. Got to give students that opportunity to practice some of these skills. Health skills aren't very comfortable sometimes, and we still wrestle with them as adults. And so I think that taking the practice opportunity is something we have to embed in our lesson planning. And then kind of where we'll focus again still here in our session is the actual instruction. And that's what teachers say, well, what's my class going to look like? I'm used to a very structured unit by unit, topic by topic, content. What's it going to look like in my instruction? And so we're going to start here with that instructional piece, the practice piece, but know that it's a road to get us to over here to the goals of health education. So Brad, anything to piggyback?
Yeah, I would just add that all 5 of these, or I'll say 6, all 6 of these, including the students, have to be considered in order to be successful with skills-based health education. You can't just be really good at instruction and practice opportunities and never assess, because you will never know if your students have mastered that skill or not. You will have not known if you helped students cross the finish line. And so all of these things we must be intentional about. We must prioritize our students, and you know them best. But these things we have to keep at the forefront when making that shift and when planning to make that shift. So we're going to dive into a little bit more of a review that we went over in our first video, but it's all about this balance, right? Me and Kim, we're not trying to get rid of the content in health education. We just need to have a good balance. It's a lot like baking. We have to have the right measurements to get the right outcome. And so if we are talking about this balance, the recommended amount is that 2/3 of skills versus the 1/3 of content. Okay. And so we're going to take some time to kind of do a couple activities where we get to kind of apply this model to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. So let's take a moment to access our training guide. And on page 1, there's a planning reflection. And so what we want you to do is just take a moment. If you want to pause the video, you can. But after reviewing those 2 images of the pie chart and the backwards design, what's one thing that you want to remember? What's something that's an aha for you right now? Something that is just really just your first reaction when thinking about making the shift to skills-based health education, and put those notes on page 1 in the training guide to help you remember that takeaway. So next, we're going to try this activity about the balance. And Kim, I want you to pretend like I am an alien. And I want you to think about how you're going to teach me to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay. So you
Okay.
probably have to assume that I don't know what that is to start with, right?
Okay.
And I want you to try to just reflect and consider about what you're going to have to teach me content wise and what you're going to have to teach me skill wise. And look, we're going to start to break this down. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm putting on my superhuman hat and looking at you through a totally different lens.
Okay.
My alien friend, Brad. Okay. All right. Some content. All right. You're going to need to know some terms for sure. You're going to need to know terms like bread, a jar, lid, peanut butter, jelly, a knife, a spoon. I don't know who spreads peanut butter with a spoon, but I use it because I usually just take a spoonful. So some terminology like that. The supplies needed, so the utensils, things like that. If you need a serrated knife to cut the sandwich. The ingredients, like I said, the peanut butter, the jelly. Some people put butter on their peanut butter and jelly. My grandma used to do that. And then I probably, because I'm a health teacher by nature, I'd talk to you a little bit about the why you're eating it, why you're even making a sandwich because it's lunchtime or breakfast. You can get some good protein, but talk about nutritional values, talking about the My Plate information and where that falls in your healthy eating. And then because my mom was pretty hard on us, we had to clean up after ourselves and don't leave crumbs on the counter. So I'd talk a little bit about safety, how to use a serrated knife versus a butter knife. And I'd say, Mr. Alien, clean up after yourself. Nobody wants to put their hand in peanut butter or jelly. And the cross-contamination of foods. Do you want your peanut butter touching the jelly, and using different utensils? So that's the content that I think I would have to tell my alien friend, Brad.
Okay, Kim. So I am feeling very knowledgeable and very wise, but I still don't know how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich. So you better teach me some skills. And so
Right.
let's take a moment, think about what skills you would have to teach me. And again, I'm going to remind you, Kim, the objective is for the student or the alien,
Right.
to make the verb make, to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So
Okay.
tell me about the skills.
Okay, we're going to make it. We have to know how to spread. So kind of when I think skills, I think what verbs, what are you doing? What is the alien going to have to be doing? And so I'm over here, using my hands to try to explain. So I'm going to have to do some modeling myself. So I'm going to have to teach you what it looks like to spread, corner to corner. Don't leave any bare bread. That's unacceptable. I have to give you a skill of cleaning if I expect you to clean it up. Does that mean spritz with antibacterial stuff or not? The skill of grabbing a jar and twisting, I think those are very different skills. How would you get into the peanut butter if you can't open it? So the open and close theory, or even if I think of a loaf of bread, taking out the breads, and some have a twist tie. How do you open that and then close that again? One big thing is following a sequential process. So you've got to get the bread out first before you do any spreading. And then is that sequential? If you get out of sync and out of line, you'll have a hot mess of a peanut butter sandwich on your hand. In combining two slices, when you think about telling an alien that has no background information, and you say, now put the two pieces of bread together, does that mean the sides that aren't full of product or together, or put them together sitting on the counter? And so being very specific about combining, what does that look like? And then actually eating, how do you grab a sandwich to eat it? If you've got horizontals or different parts. If it's in force, do you grab it? So I think there's different ways to eat a sandwich. And so that's another skill because you're doing. So what's the act of doing there? And it makes a peanut butter and jelly sandwich sound incredibly hard to make when you outline it like this. But to me, that's the content stuff and then the skills that I would like alien friend Brad to engage in to make a peanut butter sandwich.
So first off, I'm incredibly hungry right now. So
Right?
thank you for that.
Yes, you're
But
welcome.
let's thank you, but first for teaching me so much.
My pleasure.
But let's put on our coordinator hat or our teacher planner hat. And the first question that always comes up is, do I have time? Right? Time is so valuable, especially instructional time. So more than likely, we don't have time to teach a student all of this content and all of this skill. So we're going to have to prioritize something, and we're probably going to have to trim off some fat here. So if we remind ourselves of the goals of health education and the objective, most importantly here for this lesson, is to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. To make, what are some things that you think we can prioritize or remove and still meet our objective and to still help us reach our goal?
Right. Cut the fluff. That's what our red lines are doing. We're cutting the fluff. And as I process through and Brad says to me, focus on the objective, I gave a lot of fluff, but I wanted to do my teacher due diligence and, share all of my knowledge about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But to cut the fluff, terminology. I think that as a teacher, vocabulary is very important to us, and it's a good way to start the unit, for example. And I remember when I was in school making these exhaustive vocab lists and having to write definitions because they said that's your hook, that's going to get into your brain. But as an alien, I don't think that Brad probably needed to know the term knife. Whether he wrote the definition or not, I don't think that would have been helpful. It's just something that he was over here spreading with, but I don't think the terminology is really necessary in most cases. The nutritional values, that has nothing to do with the making of the sandwich. That was just Kim's ideal world of making a sandwich. Same thing with safety and sanitation. It was just important to me to have a clean counter after. It has nothing to do with the making, that skill, that objective. The why, no offense, but Brad's probably like, I don't care why, I'm an alien. I'm just supposed to make it. I don't care the why. Don't care about the my plate information at that point. And so, sorry if you're a nutritional unit lover, but we'll get there, but not in this make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Doesn't matter. So I think the things that were necessary were the supplies. Like, you have to have the tools there to do your skill, and the ingredients. Those are also the tools. Now the skills, cleaning has nothing to do with the making, but I think these other things and the eating, nobody said anything about eating a sandwich. We're going to make and eat. That'd be different. But these other steps, I think, were probably important skills that alien Brad would have needed. So, Brad, do you agree? Do you feel like there's something that is crossed out that maybe you really did need as an alien?
No, I just want to stress that it's not that some of these things that we put a red line through are great practices as a teacher. Like, including the why is very important in a lot of lessons and just as a teacher in general. But when you're looking at how do I get a good balance of content versus skill, this is a similar strategy that you can use, connecting back to your objective. What is it? What is that knowledge that they have to know to be able to complete the skill or behavior? And if we looked at our balance prior to the red lines, it's pretty equal. It's 50-50. But then after you take away those red lines, you can see our balance is more appropriate to our objective, to a skills-based health education. It's more closely related to the 1/3 versus 2/3. And so maybe time is not an issue for you, but you are wanting to make that shift. This is something that you can do to try to help yourself with that. Lay the content and skills side by side and see where your balance is. And so with that, Kim, are you ready for them to try it on their own with a health standard?
I feel like they're ready.
I think so too.
Yes. So we've been aliens, we've been superhumans. Kind of a fun topic to kind of approach that balance conversation. And so now it's time to put your true health instructor hat on and look at a 7th grade health topic. And we look at this performance indicator, and we've listed that for you here, but the indicator talks about demonstrating behaviors to avoid or reduce health risks to yourself or others. So if we look at just the objective, we fine-tune that, and the skill in the objective is to avoid sunburn and or heat-related injuries or illness. And so that's your main point. So put that hat on and see the content versus skill that students will need through the lens of just that objective. And so in your training guide on page 2, we have that similar setup that Brad and I modeled for you. And so what out of this objective is the content that students need to know? And then what do students need to be able to do to master this objective? So take a couple minutes. If you need to pause the video, do that, but give it some thought. Just like Brad and I, bantered back and forth with the questions, fill out your own table there on page 2 on a real health performance indicator.
Yeah, and I think it's okay, Kim, if they start off the same way we did. If it's all the things that you can think of, what's your balance like? Do you need to get rid of some content? Do you need to add some skill? Cross off, erase, add. But this is a good activity for us to try as we are trying to find that right balance. So moving on, we're going to show you a couple examples of a unit outline of a content-based health education unit outline from RMC Health, and then we'll compare that to a skills-based version. And so both of these outlines are an RMC Health outline, which their outlines are really high quality. We've really enjoyed working with them. And so both examples are going to be related to Standard 7 self-management. And so we just wanted to take a moment so that you can kind of get the frame right. We're trying to demonstrate healthy mental and emotional health practices and behaviors to improve the health of oneself and others. Okay, and this is a 7th grade unit, and our length of the unit is 3 days. Okay, and self-management. Kim, anything else you'd add to that?
When we put these up on the screen coming up, if the words are a little bit small, these are linked in your training guide for you to look at. So if the wording's a little small, but feel free to access those and print those if you need to. So let's look at this first example, Brad.
So we're just going to highlight some things. Again, this is the content-based outline. You can see that on the left side in the first column, it lists which day it is. So you can see on day 1 in this example, there's going to be some whole class discussion on stress, and they're going to come up with a definition for stress. And again, I kind of want you to, at this point, try to pay attention to the time allotted for each activity. So 25 minutes for that class discussion and to come up with a definition. And then they're going to continue to discuss for 35 minutes on what stress looks like and how they've experienced stress themselves. So that entire first day is used on a lot of discussion. And day 2, they're going to watch a video, get into partners, develop a T-chart, some activities that are very commonly seen in health education classrooms across the nation. This outline is not a bad outline. It's a content-based outline. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to compare the two. You can see on day 3, they are going to have another whole class discussion. Students are making a list of healthy things they can do to relieve stress. So they're making a list. And then for 10 minutes on day 3, they're going to practice deep breathing. and then they're going to finish with taking an assessment. So a couple things to highlight here. The only time I saw them actually practice a healthy management behavior was for 10 minutes to practice deep breathing. We can see that they spent a lot of time on learning about stress, that content part, but a very limited time to practice it and to get an opportunity to get feedback. And then we can see that the teacher assessed, but the assessment was not necessarily aligned to the goal. Remember, our goal and our objective was to demonstrate healthy mental and emotional health practices. Not to know, but to demonstrate. And so that assessment is not necessarily aligned closely with the standard. All right. So let's flip gears into the skills-based outline and let Kim take you through this example.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brad. Again, the same 3-day unit, same objectives, same takeaways that we're looking for. And this entire first slide is day 1. And so it looks like there's a lot going on. But again, like Brad indicated, focus on the time spent in these activities and who's talking, who's doing an activity, and what is that activity looking like. So try to visualize what these activities are looking like in the classroom, what the teacher's doing, what the students are doing. And so we start out in these 10-minute segments, and they're playing a relay race right out of the chute. It's not a sit and get, but they are actively engaged, looking at balancing a ping pong ball on a clipboard, kind of like a relay race game, like the egg pass game, and then having a 5-minute discussion about how they felt. Was that stressful in that game? And then they just kind of write sticky notes about that. Another 5-minute chunk talks about discussing with a partner, a little bit more safe environment where they can talk to themselves about, boy, that made me a nervous wreck, or I was really good at that. We do that in PE class. And so that opening 20 minutes, there's been just more activity in setting the stage for this emotional connection to stress management and mental health. And so then we dig into that content knowledge, and that's 10 minutes. And it's handout driven again, but it feels a little bit different when you've got that 3 minutes of a definition of stress. And so in Brad's content focused, there was a little bit more about defining it as a group and that kind of thing. But here it's a 3-minute, here you go, here's the definition. And so that feels a little bit different on the vocab part of this unit. And then one of Brad and I's favorite parts is this steps for the skill. And so giving students that sequential step-by-step process of how are we going to tackle managing stress. And so then another favorite part is teachers modeling that. And so we as the instructors give those examples of a time that we experience stress and make that relatable to their lives. And then that 15 minutes of application time comes next. There's like kind of that card idea for coping strategies, and so they can bounce through that activity. That's all day 1, kind of action-packed, and you're hopping and you're really chunking that lesson. Day 2, come back with a little review for 5 minutes, and here's that heavy day of practice. And Brad and I are going to talk you through the stages of skill development, and this is a real heavy hitter. And so giving kids the opportunity to wrestle with the skill and practice it. There's still a T-chart there in this particular lesson, but the reflection piece is giving them time to really wrestle with it, mess up a few times, providing that safe environment that they can practice. And then day 3 is another reinforcement of all the practice. And the self-reflection is paramount for attaining some of these health skills, and giving them that time to say, boy, I did that really well, or that felt really weird, and giving them that self-reflective piece, and then taking that connection to outside of the class practice for not just themselves, but others. And so when we look at the assessment on this, Brad said that 25 question test, Brad, like on your example?
Yes.
Okay, so if it was to demonstrate that the multiple choice type test isn't going to cut it. But when we look at a performance assessment, on stress management, we're actually performing something. It's not linked here, but you get it's probably scenario based, but it's actually a performance. So they're demonstrating this as more of a better fit for that assessment based on the objective. So that's kind of the flip side of a content to skills based.
Yeah, and two things just to highlight, and I know Kim mentioned it, but it's not that both examples define stress. So we're not removing the content. It's just different, completely different priorities. So here on the content based, the entire first day was spent on defining stress, where Kim's example was quickly done in 3 minutes. Here's the definition of stress. And you can see specifically, and I love this outline on how it even identifies in the bold, what's content, what's skill. And in my example, they did a T-chart where on the right, they were reading a stressful situation, and on the left, it explained what happens to the body. Well, that's great content, but that's not probably as helpful to reach our goals as Kim's example. Again, another T-chart. So it's not that T-charts are great. It's just how are we using that tool? And in Kim's example, it's helping them identify the personal stressor, and then they're self-reflecting on that stressor on which level it is. And so again, it's just providing them that practice opportunity. And so what we'd invite you to do now on page 2 of the training guide, we would like you to just reflect on your own lessons, your own instruction, what health education looks like at your site. Which example do you see the most often? And more than likely, you're not going to be one or the other. A lot of times we see both, but which one do you see most often? Which one more closely resembles your current instruction or planning? And which example do you think would provide students the best opportunity to demonstrate healthy mental and emotional health practices? And just reflect on that in this page 2 of your training guide. Kim, anything else to add?
Nope, just take some time to really compare on what students are doing. I think that's the most impactful question for me as you compare the 2 different styles of units. So, yep, take some time to reflect. Page 2.
So this next part is also an ask and a task for you. And this is, I think, probably one of the most powerful parts of this learning is taking your own lesson or your own unit, and let's review it. Let's dive right into it. So you're going to start off on part 1 of page 3 in your training guide, and let's just look at what do you think the ratio is? Look at where the time is spent. Like Kim has continued to say, who's doing most of the talking? Who's leading the discussion? And kind of reflect on those first 2 questions after you've accessed your own lesson or your own unit example. If you're not a health teacher or you don't have access to your own lessons, you can certainly go back and kind of continue to reflect with these questions on one of the examples that me and Kim provided and that are also linked in your training guide.
Perfect. So as you reflect on your lesson, and so just with the lens of the 1/3, 2/3 balance, and just kind of overall thinking, Brad and I are going to take you through it's a little bit more of the why, I think, and a little bit more of this planning your shift in your curriculum. We're going to talk about the health skill progression model. And so RMC Health has done a real nice job of making this very teacher friendly. And so when we design lessons as teachers, we start with an introduction, and we call that, like our hook to get our kids into the unit. And we put our fancy, videos in, and we really get them engaged. And then we have some type of reinforcement time or practice, and letting kids wrestle with a little bit of the content. And then at the end of the pretty packaged unit, we assess their mastery. And so that's a true skills-based thinking as we look at the development. But kids need a lot more of this middle triangle than I think that some of the content heavy curriculum provides them. And so this is the model that we're going to kind of talk you through each step of this progression to really get kids to mastering health skills and really reaching those goals of health education. So we're going to dive into each of these individually. So as you're looking at that lesson plan that you have in front of you, be looking at these components as we start to walk through, and you've got some questions there in your training guide that can help facilitate as you're looking at your own. So we're going to dive in here, and so we're going to look at what's happening in each section of this lesson planning. So in the introduction, these are kind of the 5 paramount things that you should be looking for in an introduction to move to this skills-based health ed. And so the first thing is to explain the purpose of the skill and why is it going to benefit their overall health. And so a little bit of the why, like Brad and I talked about in the alien example, it is appropriate to start with that at times. And so here would be a good place. And then the second bullet is the processing that we did, content versus skill. So you'll have to introduce some of that functional knowledge. So once you weed out the fluff, how do we get that functional knowledge? So that really basic knowledge that kids do need, how do we get that introduced to them? And then the third, provide that sequential process, that step-by-step overview of the skill. And so when Brad and I did our alien example, that was what has to come first? You got to get the bread out before you can spread anything on it. So providing a step-by-step look at it and then modeling it. And in the example that I talked through on the skills-based, as a teacher, I would have modeled some of those stressful times that I've had in my life and how I process through. So modeling through your instruction. And then if you don't have some of the background that you can't relate to a personal experience, provide them scenarios or examples that they can start to analyze for the skill. And so as just your introduction, so that first part, really that whole day one, I feel like, of the example I shared, these were kind of some thoughtful questions and topics that I would want to see in an introduction. So that's that first part of that skill progression.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I'll add, just on the progression model as a whole, is that you can be bought into the idea of teaching skills, and you can be on board to making the shift to skills-based health education, but maybe not going by best practices or not using the right instructional strategies to teach skills. And so this is the why behind that. This is the proven way to teach skills. And this is not just applicable towards health education. You can use this same model in physical education, in just about anything skill related that you want to apply. So I just wanted to add that. And Kim just went through the introduction. So when you're introducing a skill, those are the 5 things that are a must have when teaching a skill, when you're introducing the skill. And then next we want to reinforce the skill. So as a teacher, we want to make sure that we're reviewing those steps from the intro. We want to make sure that there are plenty of opportunities for students to practice that skill or strategy. If we can identify areas outside of our health instruction where students can practice that, we want to make sure students and other teachers in our building are aware of that. We want to make sure that as students are practicing, that we're providing feedback, relevant feedback, as those students are demonstrating. Okay, so that's real-time feedback. And then we want to reteach. As you are using your formative assessments, as you're observing your class and your students, you're going to find areas that you need to reteach. And that is a best practice for reinforcement. And you're going to find that is probably the feedback, and the reteaching is probably where you have the most power as a teacher to make an impact on those students' lives. So that third step is mastery. So are we providing students with the right amount of challenge? Because we know as teachers, if it's too high of a challenge, they're going to give up. And if it's too easy, they're going to lose engagement. So we have to have that right amount of challenge for the skill strategy. And then I think this part gets forgotten a lot, and that's the opportunity to reflect. So we want students to have the opportunity to self-reflect on the skill. How did it feel? Was I successful? Why not? And when it comes to assessments, we want to make sure that we're collecting data so that we know, did our students reach our objective? Have they mastered this skill? If we don't collect data, then we don't know. And that's unfortunate. So that's an important part of the mastery stage. And then we want to make sure if we are collecting data, or when we are collecting data, we want to provide that feedback and information to our students so that they can be responsible and have ownership of their own learning. Kim, anything you'd add to those two steps?
Yeah, if I could. Fantastic job outlining those steps. One thing I would add on this mastery piece, right at the bottom, so we collect data and what is that telling us? And then providing the feedback to not only the students, I think is powerful, but then coming back as maybe your data team, if you have the opportunity to meet with your other like subject teachers, and how is that changing our instructional practice. So you may have to rewrite that lesson, and you've made that first transition to maybe your first skills-based unit, and you've done it, and your data isn't really showing what you wanted it to show. Give yourself some feedback too. How will that change your instructional practice? And so, curriculum's ever changing, and it's quite a cycle, but when you first make your transition here, know that it's okay here, that if your mastery isn't giving you everything you need, it's okay to reflect and give your own feedback to change that instructional practice. So I just wanted to add that, Brad, about students and teachers to give that feedback to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the next slide is an image from RMC Health. And again, it's linked in your training guide for your benefit. But this is everything that we just talked about in one slide, in one image. And I find this very helpful when lesson planning or reviewing a lesson, finding out how I can improve a lesson, because this is an easy way for me to say, okay, did I give, almost like a checklist? Because more than likely as a teacher, you're doing many of these things already. It's just, especially if you're a PE and health teacher, so many of these things are just such a priority and come so easy to us as coaches because we're used to teaching a skill, but we're not maybe as accustomed to do it in the health classroom. And so when you're using this as more of a checklist, we can make sure that we've got all of these items necessary to help students be successful. So use this to your advantage when planning.
Right, it's great visual, and bust out that lesson that you've been wrestling with in front of you, and use that table that Brad just shared, and dig into your training guide and use that lesson to focus on each part of the skill progression. And so parts 2 through 4 take you through that. And so that document that Brad just referenced is linked right here. It's going to be linked in every part. And so take your lesson, really reflect. And so we as health educators, Brad and I, we're giving you that time to reflect on your own lesson. And so answer these questions in your training guide to continue to process through your lesson.
And I bet as you review your own lesson, you're going to find several best practices of that skill progression model already there. And so highlight those, find the areas that you're doing really well, and then which areas are you missing and how can you add those. So complete that part of your training guide, and then you'll be ready to move on with us. So we're going to come back to the backwards design to kind of full circle here. And we just want you to use this model again, as you've spent lots of time reflecting. How are you going to make that shift to the skills-based health education planning, or how do you better yourself in your planning? And again, we just want to use this model as we're making that shift. So where is it that your shift is needed? Is it reestablishing your goals? Is it prioritizing your instruction and planning to these goals? Is it going back to the skill progression model? Is it using standards to more closely align your instruction or assessments? But again, this is the same image as before, but we just wanted to bring you full circle because now you've really been picking apart your lesson or unit as you've been going through this last 10 or 15 minutes of this video. And so let's reconnect and reflect on that lesson that you've been looking at according to this model. So does your assessment align to the standard or goal that you've set in that lesson? Are your practice opportunities for the students and how prioritizes it, how much time are they spending, and is the instructional strategies there. We just talked a lot about that in detail. So reconnect back to this backwards design, and where is it that you need to focus or shift related to this backwards design. And so that's going to take place on the final reflection. It's going to be found on page 5. And so take a moment to do that as a final reflection opportunity.
Yes, be very reflective. And Brad, I may piggyback on the backwards design, and I'm going to take your words. I've heard you say it several times. But in that final reflection, when you look at the assessment that you've maybe always given, I hear that language a lot from teachers. Well, we've always had this assessment, and I feel like it's very, very tied to our standards. And I feel like it's well written at verb level. And then we've changed our instructional practice, and we've embedded these things that Brad and I have kind of walked through. So you can't change one and not the other. And so if you do all the hard work to change your practices and have an assessment that's still that 25 question, multiple choice type setup, kids aren't going to square well with that. And so, if you change one, you've got to change the other. And so I just wanted to add that for this final reflection piece. What does the balance look like? And then how are these things aligning?
Yeah, and Kim, to go even further, time, we talked about it earlier. Mm-hmm. Time is so hard, and it's most common obstacle to overcome. And so if that final assessment, if that written assessment is not helping us reach our goal or measure if we're reaching that goal, what a great way to add additional time to our unit or to our practice opportunities. If we don't have to give that, if we can measure and assess that skill in an activity, we just found some more additional time available. And so that should be great news.
Yeah, that's real good news. If there's not a standard it's tied to, kick it out. Okay, we realize that this is a big journey. It is a big shift. If you've lived in the content-based health ed for a long time, it's a big process. And so number one, Brad and I want to say, be patient with yourselves, give yourselves a lot of grace. And so as we've started this navigating and this shifting, we've found these resources to be very helpful. And so they are listed as well in your training guide. And so we want to take a little bit of time. So this is the exhaustive list, but this very first thing, RMC Health has put out some health skill guides that we're going to highlight here that have been so helpful in the planning on instructional strategies and activities. And so, Brad, I'm going to have you walk through this super fantastic video that you've put together on how to access these.
Sure, Kim. So the first thing I want to make sure is that everyone knows how to access it. And again, the link is on your training guide. But when you get to the website, if you'll click on resources and tools, as you'll see my pointer up there, that's going to get you to the best place where you can access the health skill guides. You'll notice that they're organized by each national standard. And so if you'll just click on the blue button, learn more. Again, we clicked on self-management since that's where we've been spending our time today. And then you're going to see resources for each grade span. K2, 3, 5, middle school, and high school. I always like going to the guide at the very bottom. It's the whole self-management grades 9 through 2 or 6 through 8 guide. And that's going to get you to all of the content. And then if you find you only like, if there's a certain section, all of those other links are to the specific parts. But this is how you get to the whole thing. And you can see how well organized it is. It starts off with a lot of just helpful teacher practices and kind of providing context in that skill or standard. But as you can see, as we scroll through here, gives you ideas for data that you can collect to make sure that your unit or lesson is closely aligned to your students and relevant and personal. Then you can see the steps. Every skill guide has the steps necessary for that skill. And so you can see that there's 4 steps here with this self-management in middle school. Teaching tips are absolutely great for us to kind of, we all love getting those teaching tips from our colleagues. And then it's going to break down each step. So each step has sub-skills. It's going to provide you with suggested learning activities. Kim, what's your favorite part about the resource?
Right, you're just scrolling by it right here. So the suggested learning activities are fantastic, but then they're always partnered on the right with a little box that talks about language of health literacy. And so we talk that health literacy game a lot. And what I liked about this, even for high school kids, sometimes they can't put the words to some of these health concepts because it has to be a little vulnerable space, right? And so having that health language prompt, and having kids rehearse that and say those things matched up with an activity, I found that to be the aha moment as we make that transition. And those activities are fantastic. You think, well, how can I make our substance education unit not so dry? Well, here we go. We start with the skills that they're doing, and then you could plug that into any content. So those are some of my favorite parts. What about you? I mean, I like this whole thing, but what are your biggest loves?
Well, so I love the teaching tips. Here we're starting to getting into ideas of how to assess. So they're giving us some assessment tools as well, which is great because a lot of times I can find ways for students to practice a skill, but how do I assess it as a teacher? And so they're going to give us some assessment ideas and then some areas that we can practice this outside our own content area. And then of course, some great resources that they've used. But I think that overall, it's not considered a curriculum, right? We get all these different people that want to provide their curriculum and the grass is always greener on that next curriculum. This isn't a curriculum. This is a guide. This is to help you improve your lessons and your units because there's probably things that you love about your unit already, but you can come to this guide and find 1 or 2 suggested learning activities that are going to help you give students practice opportunities or a new way to assess a skill. And so again, you can access any standard for any grade span. They have great posters for the skills, include visuals. So we can't highlight this resource enough. It's free. Again, it's linked in your training guide. Click on resources in the top right, and you can explore on your own any standard you want, any grade span you want. Kim, anything else before we move forward?
No, just I give a +1, a like, a heart. I just love this website. I reference it quite a bit. Even when teachers call and say, I just need a quick something I go there and they've got my answer for me. So it's a great resource. So as you're taking this journey with us, with your colleagues, Brad and I have not just this session that we've been walking through with you. We've referenced the first in this series called the why of making this transition. And then our time together today has been with making that shift. And so we have some new things on the slate here, looking really at the instructional strategies. We've got 6 different sessions there that look at specific strategies to help implement this skills-based idea. And then there's another part of our series that talks about really digging into those national standards. And so if you haven't done a lot of work in those, we're going to get pretty gritty with those 8 different videos, but we would love to have you join us for any of those, all of those, and watch this one again. That'd be super fun as well. But we thank you for spending this time with us today. We wish you luck on the journey of making this shift to skills-based health education. So Brad, thank you for spending your time with me today as well. So
thank you to MOSHAPE, DESE, and Missouri Healthy Schools for making these videos happen and for giving us the professional learning opportunities as well. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.